Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is Funeral Service Insider, the podcast from Kates-Boylston. Each episode, we talk to people who understand the delicate balance of change in a profession and vocation steeped in tradition. This week, we are speaking with Greg Grabowski of Hospice Advisors and Hospice Insights. A couple of months ago, or last year, we spoke with him. He actually spoke at one of our conferences about a CRM, a customer relations management system that he was developing to help funeral homes stay in touch with hospice. He's going to tell you about all of those things, and I'm going to ask you to hang around until after the credits at the end, because I want to give you my contact information so you can reach out to me with questions, concerns, and suggestions for the show. But let's get into it with Greg right after this message from our sponsor, Passages International. Looking for a way to honor your loved one while honoring the planet? At Passages, we specialize in eco-friendly funeral products made from renewable, biodegradable materials. Whether it's a stunning willow casket, a biodegradable urn for scattering, or our unique memorial keepsakes, we help create meaningful goodbyes that tread lightly on the earth. Join the movement toward greener funerals. Visit passagesinternational.com and discover how you can celebrate a life while protecting the planet for generations to come. Link in the show notes. So you've been on the show before, and we featured you in the magazine and, of course, in Funeral Service Insider. But just a quick introduction for people who are new, because this show we get new listeners every week, which is so much fun. So if you just introduce yourself real quick, and then we can get started.
Sure. And Tony, thanks for having us or having me. And my name's Greg Grabowski. I own a consulting firm called Hospice Advisors, and also a little tech platform that I've opened up with some tech folks called Hospice Insights. Been in the hospice industry just over 28 years. And about 10 years ago, I was working for a large for-profit national hospice. I had just been appointed to do some outreach into different industries. And I decided funeral homes should be a great partnership for our national company. And I went to Austin, Texas to the NFDA convention. I set up a huge booth. I had this huge sign that said hospice. And I can't tell you, I must have shipped 20 boxes full of materials because I read how many funeral directors were there. And I'm like, I'm going to just be mobbed.
Yeah.
And I wasn't. In fact, the first day I had to stand out in the hallway to try to engage and didn't get anybody. And long story short, Aurora Casket, before they merged with Matthews, bumped into Lacey Robinson. Subsequently, Lacey and I wrote a book. And subsequently to that, Lacey and I have been, I think evangelist is probably too strong of a word, but we're really passionate about creating this link. So Hospice Advisors is a consulting company for hospice, but we've decided we want to try to engage funeral directors and hospices. And so we're trying to help funeral directors.
So from my perspective, I'll go ahead and say I'm an evangelist because one of the reasons that we connected so well and so kind of early on, well, for me, because I've only been doing this for 3 years, is this notion of the continuum of care and getting directors to start to see that the best time to start helping people is before they're dead. And they can do that. I mean, there's pre-need and there's all this, but this more holistic approach where we take care of not just the finances, but the psychological aspects and the body and the logistics. And those are the parts that are kind of left up in the air. And that's why there's a space for someone like you to come in and say, okay, how do we connect these pieces and make it easy on everyone?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what's interesting? I'm preparing to do a little keynote, and I was looking back at how hospice started, and it got started in 1969 in England with Cicely Saunders. And then I played the timeline all the way across. And so back in 1969, the thought of hospice, what we see today, incredibly foreign, major disruptive. Healthcare institutions looking at it like, that's crazy. Why would we ever do anything like that? And it went from 1969 to 1982. That was when the Medicare benefit came along. And to your point, now, today, when I ask healthcare professionals, tell me about the continuum of care, they talk about obviously from birth all the way to hospice. So they recognize hospice, and hospice, to your point, is very holistic. We get paid by Medicare, but we still get paid. And I can't tell you why. I think it's probably pathological, but I really feel like the funeral home ought to be part of that continuum of care. When we ask healthcare professionals, they ought to say the closure piece, the aftercare, the bereavement, the grief support, like that all is important for this life journey, the life celebration. And funeral professionals do all that. And you're absolutely correct. The economic engine, as I've learned for funeral professionals, is pre-need. That's a big piece. But there's a whole nother world related to hospice and healthcare professionals that funeral directors could be part of the continuum of care. And here's the cool part. They still can get paid the way that they get paid. So I don't really see it as an economic, like, oh, I shouldn't do this because these are my only, two sources of pre-need and then, at need. Yeah, I think there's a whole nother world that funeral directors could be a part of, which I think it's like the continuum of life, the continuum of care. Hey, you guys are professionals, come join the other professionals. So yeah, fill in this gap. Let's go.
One of the things that I've been harping on recently, and I got into a little public argument about it, is the rise of this death doula movement, which I don't begrudge for a second, but I know that a lot of people, let's call them more traditional funeral home owners, are kind of wary of the death doula movement. And the only reason that it exists is because funeral directors aren't stepping into that place. Like the death doulas are filling the place where funeral directors should be. And I don't begrudge them. I just think that it's something the funeral directors can learn from and participate in rather than fight against.
Oh, wow. Really great, great observation. And, the interesting part about this is when you look at this death doula, and I'm going to tell all your listeners, I am not an expert in death doulas. So there's a lot that I do not understand. But to your point, I think hospice feels the same way to a certain extent, is that some of the death doula piece is crept into hospice. And there are gaps. There's unreimbursed gaps. There's gaps that consumers don't want to pay for, and doulas have kind of stepped in there. But I think to your point, we ought to be whatever, whether it's doula, funeral, hospice, or whatever, everybody needs to come together and partner on filling up that gap. To a certain extent, it feels like there's a little kind of competition and jockeying and so on and so forth. And I don't know how productive that ultimately is. So
yeah. I agree 1,000%. But one of the reasons that I wanted to have you, well, two reasons. One reason is because I kept missing you beforehand, but you recently had a conference. And if you could just tell me how the conference went, tell everybody what it was, and if you're doing it again.
Sure.
I guess I should have checked to see if it was a disaster before I asked the question. But it probably wasn't a disaster.
I will tell you, we would have liked to had more attendance, but we did have I think it was just a little over 20 people, which is totally great. I think we picked a bad time of year. It was in December. Worsham College hosted us, which, by the way, I have never been to a mortuary school. We were very appreciative to be there. I think it went really, really well. Our whole goal is to have something that was low cost for a funeral home to come to one day, and for us to download absolutely how you should approach this hospice situation. And so we talk about language matters. We give them background related to hospice, but as it is important to them, we don't go through all stuff that's not important to a funeral director. How do you talk to a hospice? We do lots of engagements throughout the course of the day. We download every little single ideas that we have, ideas that we have that have worked, ideas that work sometimes and not all the times. And we discuss how can you approach the big hospice market, just being as a single funeral director, or in some cases we had some of the larger providers there listening as well. So I know every funeral home is not going to say, let's do a really expensive consulting engagement. So this is their opportunity to come to a workshop and hear it all. We get rave reviews, and I do. I think it's just good stuff. So thank you for asking. We are looking at our next opportunity, which will probably be, somewhere in the May, June, somewhere into the late spring, early summer. We obviously don't want to step on any major convention toes or
It's getting
seminar
harder
toes or
though,
those kind
isn't
of
it?
things. It is. You guys have a lot of stuff. You have a lot of stuff.
It's
Yes,
brutal.
it is.
It's brutal.
It is. Well, hospice just consolidated down to one association, and you obviously have got multiples. So it is sometimes,
Right.
and those multiples have the big convention, the little conventions, and yeah, so it is a little challenging.
Well, I'm with any luck, there will be more kind of more consolidation. There won't be consolidation between the different entities, but I think that in the coming years, the in-person things may be they're more regional, like the national conventions. Like it's so funny. Everyone gets excited to go to the national conventions. I am not a national convention guy. I go to our little conventions because I like to be able to talk to 10 or 15 people. I don't like the overload at those big ones. I like the very focused. If I'm going to take 3 days out of my life, I want it focused. I don't want to just be fire hosed with information because.
Yeah, sure. You're absolutely right. Well, and it's interesting too, because I think to your point, in the smaller, you get more opportunity to then really either sit with people or potentially have sessions, and then after the session, be able to approach the person and really get into, some of the things that are really interesting to you. I find the same thing within the hospice space. I like to go to smaller ones where I can engage in, frankly, interesting dialogue that helps both parties. The large ones, yeah, you get lost a little bit. I think the large ones are good for people that are starting out. It's a great opportunity to see the whole landscape and to learn. I think if you're a more advanced practitioner, you want to seek out things that are worth your advanced practitioner. How do you make yourself better?
Attention. And if I may, this is, I guess, a good place to compliment you because you spoke at ours in the fall, in the spring, in
Providence.
Right. And I mean, I've seen you speak a couple of times. You're a really, really engaging speaker, but you were kind of like a rock star. And this is half a segue, because
that's so nice. That's very nice of you to say. Thank you.
But you made a lot of connections and you shook a lot of bird cages. And one of the reasons was because you announced that you were working on or had just finished this CRM that you were real excited about. So let's talk about that and talk about that in the context of helping, individual funeral home owners and small independents.
Sure. So one of the things when Lacey and I started working together, and if you read our book, it talks about the need for CRM. And then when we were working with funeral directors, and I totally understand how they run their daily business and what happens during the day and how they're staffed for that, they're full. And so when Greg says you got to do this, and you got to start recording hospices, you got to do all these things, they're like, wow, that is just absolutely overwhelming. So we tried to put it into, bite-sized pieces. So it would say, month 1, do this, month 2, do this. And as we were going through it, that kind of sort of worked, but there needed to be a bigger, easier system. And I will pivot back to, some folks may remember the book by Jim Collins, It's Good to Great. I love it. It is my kind of most important, most influential business book that I ever read, but he talks about technology as an accelerator. So I said to Lacey, we need to get with some tech people, and we need to take all of our concepts, and we need to put it into a tech platform that accelerates for funeral directors so that it's not these rocks and or objectives, those kinds of things, and then it's on a piece of paper and so on and so forth. Like, we need the whole thing to come alive in one system, and we need to make it inexpensive. We need to make it user-friendly, and the journey, it's up and running now. We have some folks that have subscribed to it. Pretty darn excited about it. It literally has everything that we've ever talked about is embedded into the system. So to when the funeral director says I'm a little overwhelmed after coming to the workshop or a little overwhelmed of what to do, I can say for $99 a month with unlimited users, everybody in your whole funeral home can use it if you want. But everything we've talked about is in here. Our tools, you can pull down every single Medicare hospice. We've embedded every single Medicare hospice in there so that you can see which hospices are in your service territory. And I can go on with about a whole bunch of, the features, but I'm excited about it that it could become a real technology accelerator for a funeral director to do this outreach that we've talked about, to fill this gap.
Are you ready to gain the competitive edge and take your business to the next level? Join us in Pittsburgh on April 1st for one incredible day where industry leaders will share the strategies that you need to beat the competition and stay ahead of the curve. On stage, we're bringing together some of the best minds in the business. Damon Wenig of Homesteaders Life Company will be presenting From Greeting to Goodbye, mapping a customer experience that families remember forever. Discover how to create a seamless and meaningful experience that leaves a lasting impression for the families you serve. Mitch Smith of eFuneral Partner will present Imagining Pre-Need Funeral Planning, Technology, Trust, and the Next Generation. Explore how technology and trust are revolutionizing pre-need funeral planning. Tyler Anderson of Precoa will present The Pre-Need Advantage, winning more families in an ever-changing market. Learn how to stand out in today's competitive landscape and build stronger connections with families. Stephanie Cassinier-Dunn with Phoenix SBA, a community bank share company, will present The Silver Tsunami, the coming wave of business transitions. Prepare for the massive shift in business ownership and succession planning as the next generation takes the reins. These top experts will reveal the game-changing insights that will transform the way you do business. Don't wait, seating is limited, and this is your chance to gain powerful strategies, network with industry pros, and supercharge your business. Register now and secure your spot at this must-attend event at the lowest price available when you use promo code FSI50 at checkout. That is all one word, FSI50. Pay only $147 per registration. That is a savings of $150 off each ticket. Visit events.kates-boylston.com to sign up today or follow the link in the show notes. So something that we used to do at Kates-Boylston 1,000 years ago, maybe 10,000 years ago, I don't know, was we used to put out, I think they called it a blue book or a red book or whatever the color of the cover was. And it was a list of every funeral home in the country. And it was, I still get people calling and asking, like, when are you putting out another blue book? And I'm like, as far as I know, we haven't put one out this century.
Yeah.
Once people started to be able to Google funeral homes in the area, it didn't make any sense. I guess, again, this is 3 owners ago. I mean, who knows? But what the difficulty now is, if you need to, for instance, ship somebody, you really just have to hope that Google is right. And you don't have kind of any authoritative direction. Like, okay, this is the funeral home. This is the guy. We just talked to him and he's okay. You just have to hope that Google is going to work for you. And I can't imagine someone leaving one of your talks and saying, well, I guess I'm going to go home and Google every hospice in a 100-mile radius. Because you showed that, right? There are thousands.
Oh my gosh. Yes, there's over 6,000 hospices. And and the interesting thing is, a lot of funeral is very local, and there's a bricks and mortar component to it. And so, and I get it. So you're used to, this is where your funeral home is at, and then your community. Hospice, a lot of the care, a huge percentage of the care is either done in an assisted living or in somebody's personal home. And nobody goes to the hospice office. So the hospice office is unimportant. So you're not going to see hospice offices very, visual. And the other thing is there are hospices that are 4 or 5 towns over. They may be an hour and a half away, and they have lots of service that they do in your community. So to your point, what is your service territory as a funeral director? And then who are all the hospices that operate in it? And I will tell you, every time I have this conversation with the funeral director, they say, there's 4. And then I run it and I go, there's 18.
Yeah.
And they go, what? And then they said, I have X amount of market share. And I always say, well, I just looked at how many hospice deaths there were last year. I just did this recently with a funeral director. And he said, well, we got 200 calls and we're a market leader. And I said, you may be the market leader, but hospice had 900 deaths in your service territory. And I have studied this for a long time, and roughly 50% of those folks were undecided. So how many of those folks that were undecided or even decided came to your funeral home out of that 900? So what's your market share related to hospice?
Right. I mean, if you're doing 200 funerals a year and there are 900 hospice deaths alone, then you're missing out. And one of the things that made you Mr. Unpopularity in the beginning could start to make you Mr. Popularity now, because a lot of it does go to direct cremation. And, the accusation is that hospice encourages it, but that's not necessarily true.
Well, and it's great that you brought that up. So, you know what? Maybe there's a few kind of rogue social workers who are very caught up in their own thoughts related to this. But if you study social work, and by the way, for hospice social workers to engage with patients, they have to be master's prepared. And so one of the elements of a social worker is that you listen to what patients and families need, and you never put your own personal viewpoint on it. You ask questions, you help them understand what they truly need, and then you point them potentially in the right direction. So 99% of the social workers are just listening to families who go, I just want a cremation. And by the way, the social workers got a lot on their plate. The last thing that is in front of them, because the funeral homes, I will say, are not pushing up forward and talking in the right language to hospice to say, I want to be of assistance. And maybe actually all these folks that want cremation, maybe they really don't, but nobody's trained the social workers. Nobody from behind them has worked forward. And the other little interesting, ironic piece to this is hospice works insanely. I mean, they work really hard up front as part of the continuum of care. So they talk to doctors and oncologists and case managers and social workers and assisted living executives and say, how can we provide value to you? How do we help you with end of life care? How can we partner? How can we do all of this? And then what results is this pretty kind of seamless continuum of care. Funeral directors need to do the same thing. Go to social workers and say, how educated really are you about all the options? How educated are you related to life celebrations and closure and so on and so forth, and help educate social workers. Social workers are not funeral home experts by any phase of the imagination. Now, hospice does life celebrations, so do funeral homes. Hospices do bereavement, so do funeral homes. Like there's great opportunities to connect. And then hospice looks for referrals, right, from healthcare resources. There's no reason why eventually funeral directors can't say, now that I've proved value, when you talk to families, obviously families can make their own choice, but you might want to say, this is a really great funeral home. They partner with us. They do great care. They do great life celebrations. They can present you with a lot of options. They really do care about you. It's not necessarily about the retail piece of this and so on and so forth. But there has to be that push up into hospice and frankly, the desire to be part of the continuum of care. So when you ask a healthcare person, what's the continuum of care? It includes funeral homes all the way to bereavement and aftercare. Sorry, I get really lathered up on that. I go really fast. Sorry.
I appreciate it. But I do want to ask about if it can work the other way. And this is a cold question that just came to my head, so I don't even know if it makes sense. But is there a world where funeral directors are also saying, now that they've, if someone comes in to make their final arrangements in advance, saying, do you have a plan for if you need hospice? Is that part of it? Is that too weird? That's something that's foreign to me.
Oh, well, that's a good question. I think if everybody's part of the continuum of care and you know how to work with incredible empathy and really listening, and there was potentially a need, it absolutely should probably go both ways. It goes both ways in, when hospice meets patients that aren't ready for hospice, they say, do you want to go to palliative care? Have you looked at this other resource? Maybe you need placement into a facility, or maybe you need to go to assisted living. And there's conversations. The big thing in hospice, and this is a big piece in Medicare, is that patients and families always have choice. But that does not mean that you can't listen and help counsel if you have the right background to counsel. So when the family says, I want to take my loved one to an assisted living, and you know the environment, you can listen to what they have to say and say, you know what, from what I'm hearing you say, based on your economics and based on this and so on and so forth, you may want to take a look at some of these options. And when it is time for hospice, we're here. So no, I don't think it's actually strange. I'm not sure that it happens. And it really, to your point, it doesn't happen either side, right? So a lot of folks come to hospice, and there are not some of the majority of time, there's not the conversation with hospice about, hey, here's the 5 funeral homes, and by the way, we really know these guys really well, and they partner with us a lot, or you're a veteran, and we know that they do incredible veteran stuff, but you can choose from any funeral home. I mean, those are the kind of conversations that aren't happening that should.
And I guess that's the thing, like if you're part of the continuum of care, but once you establish a relationship with hospice and understand what their issues are, the rest of it can make sense a little bit more, instead of seeing it as maybe kind of a barrier, or maybe just a spin the wheel kind of, maybe they are sending people, or maybe they aren't. But if you learn how the ins and outs work, it just makes you more effective. It can make you, I think, more effective as a funeral director or a funeral arranger.
When you look at the continuum of care, if we move out of our space for a second. So when you go to the doctors, I had to have a back operation, and I went to my general practitioner, and he said, look, I got all the recommendations from the folks that looked at your MRI and your scans and so on and so forth, and you need back surgery. So what did I say? I said, okay, what do I do? And he said, well, you're in this hospital system and you have this insurance. And so there's 5 physicians. I'll give you their names and you can choose from them. Okay, well, I don't know anything about neurological back surgery. Those names will kind of mean nothing to me. I might Google them a little bit. But what was the natural question? Well, who would you go to?
Absolutely.
And he said, look, I would go to this doctor. He doesn't have a really good bedside manner, but you have some, stuff that really needs a really good surgical hand. And he's a great surgeon. He thinks really highly of himself, but he's a great surgeon.
but there's a reason.
Exactly. And true, he had zero bedside manner. He really did think highly of himself, and he did a great job on my back. So that's what we're talking about, continuum of care. It's really based on the care that you do, not the deals that you make, or if there's commissions and things like that. I have different some outside providers, and they always say, well, what if I give a kickback to the hospice for using X, Y, and Z? And I said, well, that'll just turn them off, and they won't take it anyways.
Right.
What you need to talk about is why are you providing value to their patients and families? They get that you have to get paid. So I think that's a misnomer. Some funerals said, well, we get reimbursed differently. And look, hospice is a business just like everybody else. So everybody understands they have to get paid in order to keep the wheels moving, and frontline people need to get paid and so on and so forth. But what really is attractive that it is this conversation about why you do what you do and how you do it, and the value proposition to patients and families. Are you a great provider? Hospice is constantly marketing itself saying, you should use our hospice. There's no reason why funeral homes can't be marketing saying, use our funeral home.
As a hospice worker, you develop a relationship with these families, and you're more protective of that than you are interested in an extra $500 a month or whatever.
Absolutely. Well, you can there's the business side of things, and there's all kinds of layers, and there's national companies, and we have private equity and that kind of stuff. But when you go to the ground level and you're a nurse, and by the way, nurses are needed absolutely everywhere. And as a hospice nurse, you don't make as much as you could in a acute care setting. And you say, why are you here? Why did you choose to do nursing here? Or you're closing out your nursing career. Why are you in hospice? And they will tell you it's a calling. Social workers will tell you it's a calling. The spiritual counselors will tell you it's a calling. Oh my gosh bless the hospice aides, so hardworking people, not paid a lot. They'll tell you it's a
Right.
calling. And those are the folks that are going to have influence with their families. And so are they going to want somebody talking with the family that doesn't feel the same way? It's a calling. It's something that's important that I'm passionate about. It's not necessarily transactional. And don't get me wrong, everybody understands underneath it all, there is the transaction, but on the first kind of connection and so on and so forth, it needs to be centered that way. So you're absolutely there's a level of passion and wanting the best for that family. We all know this because we're in the end of life experience, but you can only do this once.
Right.
I say it all the time. And lots of people in our industry say it this, but you can only do this once. If you make a mistake, you can't redo it. You can apologize, but you can't get it redone. So
Right.
that's why, like, this whole piece, this last piece of the continuum is so vitally important.
Excellent. And that pretty much brings us up to the end of our time. But I do want to ask you if there's something I should have asked and didn't, or something you thought you'd get the opportunity to say, but I didn't provide it.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, I would just say if folks are interested in the CRM or our book, we have it on our new website, which is www.hospiceinsights.com. And they can see there we have
Link in the show notes.
Yep, and we have a real cool little video that folks can watch about it as well. So, but otherwise, I think you asked everything. And Tony, I have to just again appreciate me get on my little soapbox here and get all lathered up and excited. But I appreciate the time.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, and have a great week.
You too. Thanks.
Looking for a way to honor your loved one while honoring the planet? At Passages, we specialize in eco-friendly funeral products made from renewable, biodegradable materials. Whether it's a stunning willow casket, a biodegradable urn for scattering, or our unique memorial keepsakes, we help create meaningful goodbyes that tread lightly on the earth. Join the movement toward greener funerals. Visit passagesinternational.com and discover how you can celebrate a life while protecting the planet for generations to come. Link in the show notes. Funeral Service Insider, the podcast, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. If you have not subscribed yet, I would love it if you did. If you'd like to subscribe, you can just pick up the podcast catcher of your choice. If you're listening on your computer, just grab your phone. And if you have an iPhone, find the purple circle that says Apple Podcasts, click on that and type Funeral Service Insider. We're the only one with that name. We will come up, and then you can follow us there. Similarly, if you have an Android type phone, you may use Spotify or Amazon Music, but it's the same deal. Just open up whatever you listen to music on, and you can also listen to podcasts on it and type our name, Funeral Service Insider, and then hit subscribe. And every time we have a new show, which is 2 to 3 times per week, you will get an update. We've been running bonus shows on Wednesdays, just 10 minutes, introductions to people around the industry. And of course, our weekly, in case you missed it, news roundup is just getting more and more popular. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please continue to listen, because it's one of the things I really enjoy making the most. By the way, if you are listening, you can also watch the In Case You Missed It on our YouTube channel, where we also put many of our webinars. If you haven't visited the Kates-Boylston YouTube channel, again, check the link in the show notes and it will bring you to our YouTube channel. All of those things can be found in the show notes. We would love for you to get in touch with us. My email address is A like Anthony, Russo, Russo, at kbpublications.com. That is K like kite, B like boy, publications.com. You can also call and leave a voicemail for us to play on the show if appropriate. And if you want to play it, or if you just want to say something and have me personally know it and not play it back, you're welcome to do that too. My phone number is 732-746-0233, extension 709. That is 732-746-0233, extension 709. And I do want to put in one last plug for this April 1st event. I'm really excited about going. I will be there. I'll be moderating a panel, almost certainly. It's always a worthwhile trip. So consider registering, and I will see you in Pittsburgh. If not, I will catch you next time on Funeral Service Insider, the podcast.